the frozen sailor. In 1984, a research team exploring a remote Arctic island found the perfectly preserved body of a sailor from an 1845 expedition. Frozen for 139 years, maintained in conditions so extreme that biological tissue should have degraded completely. When they examined him, they discovered something that shouldn't have been possible. His internal organs were perfectly intact, his facial features recognizable, and tissue samples showed he'd been alive far longer after his ship was abandoned than anyone thought humans could survive in those conditions. The expedition he'd been part of was famous throughout the scientific community. 2 ships, with 129 men, that had vanished searching for the Northwest Passage. For over a century, historians taught that the crews had died quickly, probably within months of abandoning their ice-choked ships. The extreme Arctic conditions, they said, would have killed them rapidly. Survival textbooks used the expedition as an example of how quickly humans perish in extreme cold without proper supplies. The standard teaching was definitive. No human could last more than weeks in those conditions. The frozen sailor proved this wrong entirely. His body showed he'd survived for years, not months. The condition of his remains, his clothing, and items found nearby indicated he'd been alive far longer than experts claimed was possible. His stomach contents showed he'd been eating, surviving somehow in conditions that textbooks said would kill a human in weeks. The body bore evidence of continued activity, movement, attempts at shelter. Even more disturbing were the physical findings. Tissue analysis revealed high levels of lead, suggesting the expedition's canned food had been poisoning them slowly from the inside. But it also showed evidence of scurvy, starvation, and something else. Signs that the men had resorted to cannibalism to survive longer than anyone thought possible. When the findings were published, Arctic survival experts initially rejected them completely and publicly. The timeline didn't match what they taught about human survival limits in textbooks. This had to be wrong. The evidence must be misinterpreted, they claimed defensively. The dating must be wrong. The analysis must be flawed. But as more bodies were found and examined systematically over the following years, the pattern repeated with disturbing consistency. These men had survived far longer than textbooks said was possible, enduring conditions that supposedly would have killed them quickly. Some bodies showed unmistakable evidence of survival lasting not months, but years in the Arctic darkness and cold. The discovery forced complete revision of what's taught about human survival limits in extreme conditions. The textbooks were fundamentally wrong about basic facts regarding human capability and resilience. Humans could survive far longer in impossible conditions than experts had ever claimed. The frozen sailor's body was physical proof that sometimes the human will to survive exceeds what science says is possible. What we know about our own species, about the limits of human endurance, was based on incomplete assumptions and incomplete evidence. Scientists had underestimated the adaptability and resilience of human beings. The living fossil. In 1938, a museum curator in South Africa received a strange fish from a local trawler. She didn't recognize the species at all and immediately sent sketches to a fish expert for analysis. His response was shock and disbelief. She'd found a coelacanth, a fish that had been extinct for 66 million years. Every textbook, every paleontology course, every expert taught without qualification that coelacanths had died out with the dinosaurs. The discovery of a living specimen contradicted everything taught about extinction and what fossils actually tell us about the history of life. The coelacanth wasn't just any fish. It was considered a crucial link in evolutionary history, one of the most important species in understanding how life evolved. Textbooks featured its fossilized remains as evidence of how fish had evolved to eventually walk on land and develop into terrestrial vertebrates. Students were taught that this ancient fish represented a stage in evolution that had ended millions of years ago, a relic of a lost world. The fossil record clearly showed coelacanths had gone extinct in the Cretaceous period. This was established fact taught in every biology and paleontology program in the world. When the curator's fish was identified as a living coelacanth, the scientific community was thrown into absolute crisis. Everything they had taught students about extinction events, about the reliability of the fossil record, about how we interpret ancient life, all of it was suddenly questionable. If coelacanths had survived 66 million years without leaving any fossil evidence in the geological record, what else had survived that we thought was extinct? How reliable were extinction timelines if an entire species of fish could hide from science for millions of years? The fossil record presented to students as a complete picture of life's history was revealed to have massive, disturbing gaps. The discovery got progressively worse for established teachings about history and evolution. When scientists studied the living coelacanth specimens carefully, they found it hadn't evolved significantly from its fossil ancestors across millions of years. For 66 million years, a time span that saw dinosaurs disappear from Earth entirely and mammals rise to dominance and diversity, the coelacanth had remained essentially unchanged and stable. This contradicted fundamental teachings about evolution, requiring constant change and adaptation to survive in changing environments. Experts scrambled desperately to explain how they had been so wrong about something so basic and important. They had taught with absolute certainty that coelacanths were extinct forever. They had used the extinction as a key example in courses and textbooks for decades. Students had memorized it as established fact, and it was completely and utterly wrong. The coelacanth discovery led to a new term in biology, Lazarus taxa, describing species that seem to go extinct in the fossil record, but later reappear alive and thriving. Since 1938, numerous other living fossils have been discovered, each one contradicting what had been taught about extinction and evolution. The coelacanth proved conclusively that much of what we are taught as definitive fact is actually educated guessing, based on incomplete evidence and limited understanding. The impossible footprints. In 1976, a paleontologist discovered human-like footprints preserved in volcanic ash in Tanzania, dated to 3.6 million years ago. This discovery contradicted everything taught about human evolution in fundamental ways. According to every textbook and anthropology course, human ancestors 3.6 million years ago couldn't walk upright like modern humans. They were still primarily tree-dwelling creatures with feet adapted for climbing and grasping. The footprints proved otherwise definitively. They showed a fully modern walking gait with modern foot structure millions of years before humans were supposed to have developed these features. The discovery site contained multiple footprint trails, suggesting not just one individual, but a population. When researchers carefully analysed them, they found footprints virtually indistinguishable from those of modern humans walking on a beach or sandy surface. The heel strike, the arch, the precise push-off from the toe, everything matched modern human walking biomechanics perfectly. This shouldn't have been possible according to evolutionary theory as taught in schools. Every anthropology student was taught that human ancestors from this period, Australopithecus afarensis, were transitional creatures in the process of developing bipedalism. They were supposed to have ape-like feet, still adapted for climbing with divergent big toes like chimpanzees. They were supposed to walk awkwardly, not fully upright with perfect balance. The evolutionary timeline taught that fully modern walking didn't develop until much later in human evolution, after the transition to Homo. The footprints contradicted all of this teaching. The individuals who made these tracks walked exactly like modern humans. Their feet were modern in structure and capability. They weren't transitional forms. They were fully developed for bipedal walking millions of years too early, according to what was taught in classrooms. When the discovery was published, many anthropologists immediately and firmly resisted the implications and the findings. They proposed alternative explanations to avoid changing their core teaching. Maybe the tracks weren't as old as claimed. Maybe they weren't actually from human ancestors at all. Maybe the analysis was fundamentally flawed or the dating was wrong. The resistance was fierce and sustained because accepting the footprints meant admitting that fundamental teachings about human evolution were wrong. But the evidence was undeniable and overwhelming to anyone examining it honestly. The volcanic ash could be reliably dated through multiple independent methods that confirmed each other. The footprints were clearly from bipedal creatures with modern foot anatomy and structure, and they were definitively 3.6 million years old, far older than the timeline for modern walking that was taught in every university. The discovery forced complete and uncomfortable revision of human evolution teachings worldwide. The neat linear progression from ape-like ancestor to modern human, the timeline taught to generations of students, was revealed to be oversimplified at best, completely wrong at worst. Human ancestors had developed modern walking far earlier than experts claimed and understood. What this meant for evolution and human history remained unclear and deeply troubling to established fields. The survivor species. In 1994, a park ranger in Australia discovered a grove of trees in a remote canyon that shouldn't exist anywhere on Earth. The species, Wollemi pine, was known only from fossils and nothing else. Every botany textbook taught definitively that this tree had gone extinct 2 million years ago. The discovery of a living population of fewer than 100 adult trees contradicted everything taught about plant extinction and how we identify truly extinct species from the fossil record alone. The Wollemi pine wasn't an obscure or minor species. It was distinctive and well documented in the fossil record with clear classification. Students studied its fossilized remains in paleobotany courses around the world. Its extinction 2 million years ago was frequently cited as a prime example of how climate change eliminated species across geological time. The fossil evidence was considered clear and definitive. These trees had supposedly vanished from the Earth completely long before humans even existed. When the ranger found living specimens in a hidden canyon, botanical experts initially thought there absolutely must be a mistake. Perhaps these were similar but different trees, a related species that had survived. DNA analysis would immediately prove they were modern relatives of the fossil species, not the actual extinct tree itself. But the DNA analysis proved the experts wrong completely. The living trees were genetically identical to the fossils. They weren't relatives or similar species. They were the exact same tree species that was supposed to have gone extinct 2 million years ago. For 2 million years, while textbooks confidently declared them extinct, these trees had been quietly surviving in one hidden location. The discovery shattered confidence in extinction declarations worldwide among the scientific community. How many other species declared extinct were actually surviving unknown in remote locations around Earth? How reliable were the textbooks that stated with such certainty which species were gone forever? The Wollemi pine proved definitively that extinct often meant we haven't found any living specimens, rather than they don't actually exist. What made this particularly embarrassing for science education was that the CEA, Nyon where the trees survived, wasn't that remote at all. It was in a national park in Australia, accessible to researchers and explorers, not some unexplored jungle or remote island. The trees had been there all along, quietly surviving through 2 million years of climate change that supposedly killed them, and somehow no one had ever noticed before. Botany courses had to be completely revised and rewritten. The confident declarations about extinction timelines and extinction patterns had to be softened significantly. Scientists had to admit uncertainty. Students who'd memorized that Wollemi pines went extinct 2 million years ago had been taught fiction as absolute fact. The embarrassment extended beyond individual scientists to the entire field of paleobotany. The underwater city. In 2000, marine archaeologists exploring waters off the coast of India discovered massive stone structures in 120 feet of water. The structures showed unmistakable signs of deliberate construction: walls, buildings, streets arranged in patterns. Carbon dating of artifacts found at the site dated them to 9,500 years ago, far into Earth's prehistoric past. This contradicted everything taught about human civilization and history. According to every history textbook and archaeology course, advanced civilization didn't exist 9,500 years ago. Humans were supposed to be primitive hunter-gatherers, not building cities with sophisticated stone architecture. The discovery site covered several square miles of ocean floor, suggesting a settlement of substantial size. The structures weren't natural formations or geological features. They showed right angles, regular patterns, and features completely consistent with human construction and planning. Massive stone blocks appeared to be deliberately stacked and arranged. Regular spacing suggested planned architecture and urban design. The arrangement looked exactly like a city that had been submerged by rising water levels. This shouldn't exist according to established history and archaeological teaching. Students were taught that the first advanced civilizations with cities, architecture, and organized societies emerged around 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and Egypt, with no exceptions. The idea that sophisticated civilization existed 9,500 years ago contradicted the entire timeline of human development taught in schools worldwide. When the discovery was announced, many archaeologists dismissed it immediately without careful analysis. The structures must be natural formations, they claimed, despite the regular patterns and right angles that nature doesn't typically produce. The dating must be wrong somehow. Any explanation was preferable to admitting that civilization might be thousands of years older than what was taught in textbooks. But independent analysis confirmed the findings completely and thoroughly. The structures showed clear evidence of tool marks and deliberate shaping by human hands and tools. The carbon dating was accurate across multiple samples and independent studies. The site was a genuine underwater archaeological site that predated the supposed beginning of civilization by thousands of years. The implications were staggering for human history and our understanding of it. If a city existed 9,500 years ago, it would have been built during the Ice Age, when sea levels were much lower than today. The city's current underwater location suggested it had been coastal and prosperous, then was submerged when glaciers melted and sea levels rose dramatically. This meant organized human civilization with architecture and planning existed during a period when textbooks taught humans were still living in small nomadic groups without organization. The discovery raised impossible questions about how many other civilizations might be hidden underwater now. The surgical skulls. In 2013, archaeologists excavating a 30,000-year-old burial site in Peru discovered something that contradicted everything taught about ancient medicine and surgical practice. Multiple skulls showed clear evidence of trepanation procedures that had been carefully performed. Surgical holes were deliberately drilled into the skull, with bone regrowth indicating the patient survived the surgery and lived afterward for years. What shocked medical historians was the survival rate discovered in the remains from this ancient population. Over 80% of patients survived these ancient skull surgeries, which is remarkably higher than the survival rate for similar procedures in Civil War-era American medicine 2,800 years later. Medical history courses taught that ancient medicine was primitive and crude, a combination of superstition, luck, and procedures that usually killed patients who underwent them. Students learned that effective surgery requiring knowledge of anatomy, infection control, and precise surgical technique didn't develop until relatively modern times. Ancient surgical procedures were supposed to be crude and usually fatal to those who experienced them. The Peruvian skulls contradicted this teaching completely and permanently. The surgical holes were precisely made, showing sophisticated knowledge of safe areas to penetrate the skull without causing fatal damage. The procedures had been performed with tools that created clean cuts with minimal bone damage and complications. Multiple skulls showed unmistakable evidence of repeated surgeries, patients surviving one procedure and returning for another years later. Most remarkably, the bone regrowth patterns indicated low infection rates in the ancient population. Somehow, 3,000 years ago, these surgeons were preventing infection at rates that American Civil War surgeons 2,800 years later couldn't match or achieve. Civil War surgeons lost about 50% of their skull surgery patients to infection and post-operative complications. The ancient Peruvian surgeons had an 80% survival rate through careful technique. When medical historians analyzed the findings carefully, they couldn't explain it through conventional understanding of ancient capabilities. Ancient people weren't supposed to understand infection prevention at all based on standard teaching. Yet somehow, these Peruvian surgeons had figured out techniques that worked, that kept patients alive and healthy after surgical procedures. They had discovered through observation and practice what worked and what didn't. Their surgical knowledge was genuine and effective, developed over generations of careful observation and experimentation with different techniques. The precision of their work, the low infection rates, the high survival rates, all of it proved that ancient people possessed genuine medical knowledge and skill. These weren't lucky guesses or supernatural intervention. This was medicine based on understanding of the body and careful technique developed through experience. The surgical skills of these ancient practitioners endured and refined their techniques across multiple generations. As excavations continued at the site, and more skulls were carefully examined by researchers, the evidence became absolutely overwhelming and irrefutable. These ancient surgeons weren't lucky guessers or practitioners, relying merely on superstition and prayer. They had developed genuine medical protocols through systematic observation and careful experimentation with different techniques. They understood fundamental principles about human physiology and the healing process that wouldn't be rediscovered for thousands of years. They had techniques for managing bleeding, for reducing infection, for allowing bone to heal properly after trauma. The infection prevention methods they used were sophisticated and effective. Researchers studying the remains theorized that these surgeons used substances with natural antibiotic properties, possibly plant-based materials known to them through generations of accumulated knowledge. They understood the importance of cleanliness and proper wound care. They had developed successful ways to manage pain in their patients. The precision of their work was remarkable for people using stone and bone tools. They knew exactly where they could safely bore into the skull without causing fatal damage to the brain tissue beneath. The 80% survival rate wasn't luck or accident. It was the result of skill, knowledge, and careful technique developed over decades of practice. The discovery forced complete and uncomfortable revision of historical narratives about ancient peoples. These ancient Peruvians weren't primitive or ignorant. They were practitioners of genuine medicine with understanding of the human body and effective surgical protocols. The techniques had to be rediscovered and relearned by modern medicine centuries later. Education in medicine had to acknowledge that ancient people had been far more sophisticated than previously taught. The child genius builders. In 2007, archaeologists excavating an ancient site in Turkey discovered something that contradicted fundamental teachings about human civilization's development in absolutely shocking ways that shook the academic world. The site, Göbekli Tepe, contained massive stone temples with sophisticated carved pillars, some weighing 20 tons and more. The structures were among the oldest buildings ever discovered by modern archaeology. Radiocarbon dating revealed the site was 11,500 years old, predating any other known civilization by thousands of years and representing the oldest known monumental architecture. This contradicted everything taught about human development and the trajectory of civilization from Stone Age to modern times. According to every textbook and archaeology course, humans 11,500 years ago were primitive hunter-gatherers who couldn't organize large groups, couldn't work stone effectively, and couldn't build monuments of any kind. The site proved otherwise, completely and definitively. The temples weren't simple structures or crude attempts at building. They featured massive T-shaped pillars arranged in circles with detailed carvings of animals covering the surfaces. The construction required quarrying massive blocks from quarries some distance away, transporting stones weighing many tons across difficult terrain, and precisely positioning them in complex patterns showing clear planning. The carving showed artistic sophistication and symbolic thinking, demonstrating abstract concepts. This was advanced, organized human activity at a level that shouldn't have existed. According to what was taught in every anthropology and archaeology course, this couldn't exist in that time period. Humans, 11,500 years ago, before the development of agriculture, before permanent settlements, before what was taught as the beginning of civilization itself, shouldn't have been capable of organizing the labor, developing the techniques, or maintaining the social structure necessary to build such a site. The teaching was definitive. Civilization developed in a specific sequence. First agriculture, then permanent settlements, then specialization of labor, then organized construction projects. Göbekli Tepe reversed this sequence completely. The builders were hunter-gatherers, with no evidence of agriculture or permanent settlements. Yet they had organized to build sophisticated temples before they had even developed farming or established towns. When the site was dated through multiple independent sources, indent methods and its implications became clear to the academic community. Many archaeologists resisted the findings fiercely and systematically. The dating must be wrong, they claimed, without accepting the evidence or considering alternatives. Or perhaps the site wasn't as sophisticated as it appeared to be. Maybe the construction was simpler than analysis suggested. The resistance reflected how deeply invested academic teaching was in the established timeline of human development that had been taught for generations. But the evidence was undeniable and overwhelming. The dating was accurate through multiple independent methods. The construction was genuinely sophisticated. And it predated the beginning of civilization by thousands of years. Everything taught about how and when human civilization developed and progressed was wrong in fundamental ways. The discovery raised profound and deeply difficult questions about human capability and society that remain unsettled and hotly contested in academic circles even today. The impossible navigation. In 1992, researchers analyzing ancient maps discovered something that contradicted everything taught about early navigation capabilities and global knowledge throughout history. Several medieval maps showed Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't be discovered by Europeans until 1820. Even more impossibly, the maps showed Antarctica's coastline as it appears under the ice, featuring bays and inlets currently buried under mile-thick glaciers that have covered the continent for millennia. This contradicted core teachings that accurate global mapping didn't exist until modern times with telescopes and modern instruments. The maps suggested someone had mapped Antarctica when it was ice-free over 6,000 years ago during different climatic periods in Earth's history. The maps weren't crude sketches or guesses made by imaginative cartographers. They showed remarkable accuracy in latitudes and relative positions of continents that shouldn't have been known. When researchers compared one medieval map's depiction of Antarctica's coastline to modern surveys using ground-penetrating radar that sees through ice, they matched precisely with disturbing accuracy. The map showed coastal features buried under thousands of feet of ice that weren't discovered until seismic surveys in the 1950s with modern technology. According to everything taught in history and geography courses, this was impossible and shouldn't have occurred. Medieval mapmakers supposedly had limited geographic knowledge, relying on fragmented information and speculation from traders and travelers. The idea that they could accurately map a continent that wouldn't be discovered for 400 years contradicted all teaching about medieval knowledge and capabilities with navigation. Even more problematic and deeply troubling, the maps' accuracy suggested they were copied from much older sources from ancient civilizations long forgotten by history. If the maps showed ice-free Antarctica, the source maps would have been created during the Ice Age before glaciers covered the continent, thousands of years in the past. This would mean sophisticated maritime exploration and cartographic surveying existed 6,000 years or more before what textbooks taught as the beginning of civilization itself. It suggested a civilization with advanced navigation technology existed in the ancient past, mapped the entire world, and then vanished completely from historical record. When researchers published their findings in geographic and historical journals, geographers and historians largely dismissed them completely and out of hand without thorough examination. The maps couldn't show what they appeared to show according to conventional understanding, they claimed defensively. The accuracy must be exaggerated or dramatically misinterpreted by researchers. But detailed and rigorous cartographic analysis confirmed the accuracy beyond any doubt whatsoever. The maps used mathematical projection techniques supposedly not developed until much later in history by Renaissance cartographers. The coastline details matched modern surveys with precision that couldn't be coincidental or mere lucky guessing. The evidence strongly suggested the medieval map makers had copied from much older source maps and documents, maps created by an ancient civilization with advanced navigation and surveying capabilities that was completely lost to historical record and human memory. The advanced batteries. In 1936, archaeologists discovered clay jars in Iraq dating to 200 BCE. Inside the carefully constructed jars were copper cylinders, iron rods, and clear evidence of acidic liquid that had been contained within them. When examined carefully by researchers, they realized they were looking at functional electrical batteries, created 1,800 years before electricity was supposedly discovered by modern scientists. This contradicted core teachings that electrical theory and application were exclusively modern developments emerging in the 18th and 19th centuries with European scientists. When a researcher built a working replica using the same materials and design from the ancient pattern, filling it with vinegar as the electrolyte, it produced measurable electrical current approximately 1.1 to 2 volts. The ancient jar wasn't coincidentally battery-like in appearance. It was a functional electrical device designed with clear purpose. According to every physics and history course taught in schools, this shouldn't exist in the ancient world. Students are taught definitively that electricity was discovered by European scientists in the 1700s, with practical applications developing in the 1800s. The narrative is clear and presented as absolute fact. Ancient peoples supposedly had no knowledge of electricity, no ability to generate or use electrical current in any form. Electrical theory and technology were presented as exclusively modern achievements of Western science. The ancient batteries contradicted this teaching completely and permanently. Someone 2,000 years ago understood clearly that combining certain metals with acidic liquid generated electrical current. They designed specific devices to produce this effect consistently and reliably. They were creating and presumably using electricity 18 centuries before Benjamin Franklin and his contemporaries supposedly discovered it. When the findings were published in academic journals, many historians and physicists rejected the interpretation immediately without careful analysis. The jars must have had some other ceremonial or religious purpose completely unrelated to electricity, they claimed defensively without evidence. The battery-like design must be coincidental or completely misunderstood by the researchers. Any explanation was preferable to admitting that electrical technology existed 2,000 years earlier than taught in every textbook for generations of students. But the evidence was undeniable and overwhelming to anyone who examined it honestly. Multiple similar jars had been found at different archaeological sites, all following the same basic design pattern precisely. The configuration wasn't accidental or random. It was intentional construction of electrical devices with clear understanding of purpose and function. Physical evidence from the same historical period suggested one specific practical use for the batteries: electroplating of metals to create decorative surfaces. Metal artifacts from the time showed clear, visible evidence of electrical plating techniques, which specifically require electrical current to function properly. Ancient texts from the region describe divine lights that burned without flame in temple sanctuaries. Possibly electrical lights powered by battery arrays connected together in series. The ancient batteries prove definitively that the narrative of steady technological progress from primitive ancient times to sophisticated modern era is fundamentally false. Advanced knowledge and capabilities existed in the ancient world and was lost completely to history and forgotten. The prehistoric machine. In 1900, divers recovering artifacts from an ancient shipwreck off the coast of Greece discovered a corroded bronze mechanism stuck in the wreckage. For decades, it sat in museum storage, dismissed as a simple device of unknown purpose or ceremonial object. Then, X-ray analysis revealed the truth hidden inside the corrosion. There was a complex system of over 30 interlocking gears performing advanced astronomical calculations with precision. It contradicted everything taught about ancient technology and mechanical sophistication. According to textbooks, mechanical devices of this complexity and sophistication didn't exist until Renaissance Europe, 1,500 years later. The mechanism proved ancient Greeks had mechanical computing technology that was then completely lost and not rediscovered for over a millennium of history. The device, called the Antikythera mechanism, wasn't simple at all upon analysis. It contained dozens of precisely cut gears with teeth so fine they were barely visible to the naked eye. The gears worked together intricately to calculate positions of the sun, moon, and planets accurately, predict eclipses years in advance, and track the Olympic Games cycle repeatedly. It was an astronomical calculator of remarkable sophistication. Users turned a crank, and the gears computed celestial positions for any given date in the past or future with accuracy. Engineering courses taught that gear systems of this complexity emerged during the Renaissance period. Ancient people supposedly lacked the theoretical knowledge and manufacturing capability to create precision gear trains for mechanical purposes. The mechanical clock, humanity's first complex geared device, was taught as a medieval invention. The idea that ancient Greeks had created something more sophisticated 1,000 years earlier contradicted established teaching about technological development and progress. When researchers finally understood what the mechanism did completely, they were shocked by the implications. The gear ratios precisely represented astronomical cycles known to ancient Greek astronomers and mathematicians. The device encoded sophisticated mathematical understanding of celestial mechanics and orbital patterns. It required both theoretical astronomical knowledge and advanced mechanical engineering and manufacturing skills. Modern attempts to reconstruct the mechanism using only tools available to ancient Greeks have struggled significantly despite modern knowledge. Creating gears with the necessary precision is extremely difficult without modern machine tools and manufacturing techniques. Yet somehow ancient craftsmen had accomplished it with hand tools. The mechanism proved conclusively that teachings about ancient limitations were fundamentally wrong and based on incomplete understanding. Ancient Greeks possessed both the theoretical astronomical knowledge and practical manufacturing capability to create sophisticated mechanical computers of remarkable precision. This technology then vanished completely from human knowledge, lost so thoroughly that when Renaissance Europeans developed mechanical clocks independently, they had absolutely no knowledge that similar devices had existed 1,500 years earlier in ancient Greece. The discovery revealed something deeply disturbing and troubling about how history is taught to students in classrooms. It suggested that entire categories of knowledge had been lost to civilization, technologies that had flourished and then vanished, leaving no trace in historical memory. Conclusion. These 10 discoveries share a common and deeply troubling impact on everything we thought we knew and believed. They contradicted everything we'd been taught in schools and universities with certainty. Each discovery forced experts to admit that what they'd been confidently teaching for years was fundamentally wrong. The pattern is clear and undeniable when examined carefully. What we're taught as established fact is often incomplete understanding based on limited evidence and gaps in knowledge. Experts make assumptions about what ancient people could or couldn't do, what's possible or impossible given their tools, and present these assumptions as fact to unsuspecting students. When discoveries contradict these assumptions, the initial response from the academic community is often denial rather than acceptance and revision of knowledge. What makes these cases particularly significant is what they reveal about education itself and how knowledge is conveyed. Students memorize facts from textbooks about when civilization began, when electricity was discovered, how ancient medicine worked, what humans were capable of in the distant past. These aren't presented as current theories or best guesses or working hypotheses. They're presented as definitive knowledge, established fact, things that are absolutely true and unchangeable. The discoveries prove conclusively that much of what's taught with certainty is actually speculation based on limited evidence and incomplete data. These cases also reveal systematic bias in how history and human capability are taught across academic fields and universities. There's a pervasive and deeply ingrained assumption that ancient people were less intelligent, less capable, less sophisticated than modern humans. The discoveries repeatedly prove this wrong completely and thoroughly. Ancient people were just as intelligent and capable as we are today. They simply had different knowledge and different tools available. Perhaps most important is what these cases suggest about current teaching and accepted knowledge. If so many established facts have been contradicted by discoveries made in recent decades, how many current teachings are actually wrong? What are students learning today as absolute fact that future discoveries will prove false? The discoveries that contradicted everything taught remind us urgently to question what we're told in schools, to remember that established knowledge often reflects merely the limits of current evidence, rather than actual truth about the world. Perhaps the ancients knew far more than we give them credit for, possessing knowledge and capabilities that we've dismissed and forgotten. Perhaps there are discoveries yet to come that will overturn everything we think we know right now about human history and human potential.